Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for By Any Other Name, which is episode 21 of season 2 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review every episode of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover the episode By Any Other Name. So By Any Other Name is the episode in which the Enterprise is conquered by a group of aliens from another galaxy calling themselves the Kelvin, who have taken human form, who intend to steal the Enterprise and take it back to its galaxy, a journey that will take 300 years, which they admit they will not be alive for, but their descendants will be alive for, and so that way the Kelvins will be able to get word to their other aliens that they can go to the Milky Way galaxy and conquer it, which they wouldn't return for another 600 years. Kirk is defiant, but every time he tries to resist the Kelvins, members of his crew is killed or his attempts fail. Until finally, while they're on their way to the other galaxy, Kirk realizes that they're not used to being human and in human bodies, so he exploits that by overloading their senses, making them angry, making them drunk, making them horny, making them jealous, and then eventually he's able to convince them that they're no longer Kelvins and that they're turning into humans, and by the time they return to the galaxy, they will no longer be Kelvins, and that they should just stay in the Milky Way and make a home at the planet they were found at, and they agree, and everything is returned to normal. So, I always found this a hidden, underrated episode. I always liked this episode. I always thought it was really good. No one's really talked about it, like I'd never really heard anything about it before I watched it, and I never heard of it, and even afterwards I barely hear anyone mention of it. And when I do hear people talk about it, most people say that this is kind of just an average forgettable episode, which I disagree. I always thought this was one of the best episodes of season 2, and I've been on record saying I'm not as big of a fan of season 2 as many other people seem to be. I mean, granted, there's a lot of great episodes in season 2, or several great episodes in season 2, like Amok Time, The Changeling, Doomsday Machine, Mirror Mirror, but beyond those few episodes, I find the bulk of season 2 to be quite mediocre and too poor. So episodes like this actually stick out to me as being good, and unlike those other episodes I mentioned, Doomsday Machine and Amok Time and Mirror Mirror, this episode is not recognized. Like, those episodes are generally considered. In fact, a lot of people say season 2 is great because of those episodes, which I disagree with. I think those episodes are the exception, not the rule. But they never mention this episode, which I think this episode is just especially like Trouble or Tribbles, for example, which I think is highly overrated. I think this episode is at least just as good as that, yet no one ever talks about it, I guess because it doesn't have the balls of cute little balls that perp. Anyway, yeah, so I think this is an interesting episode to see the Enterprise conquered, to see Kirk in an impossible situation. What I like about this episode is that every attempt he makes to overpower the Kelvins fail. In fact, it make the situation worse. And I do like how Scotty and Spock, they were coming up with this plan to deactivate their main power source, and they found that it's just impossible, that the protection on the power source was too good. And so it really outlines what happens when you encounter a superior species with superior technology. And it's kind of compared to, because sometimes there's episodes of TNG where the Enterprise D will encounter these puny little species with lasers, and they just try to shoot the Enterprise and it does nothing. But here we get it from the other perspective of the the enemies being the one with the superior technology, where, kind of like the Borg is a later example, but where our technology doesn't really do anything against. And this is in contrast to a couple episodes of the original series where they encountered a supreme force where all they had to do was find that one weakness that would disable them. Like in the Squire of Gothos, you had a Q-like, godlike alien, and all he had to do was like shoot a mirror out, and that would disable his power. And then there was something like I think there was a more recent example. I Mud, where they were kind of taken over by those robots. And all they had to do was like put on improv theater, and that made the robots short circuit. So a lot of the original series episodes would, even if they encountered a superior force, they would just find that one Achilles heel. And granted, these aliens do have an Achilles heel, but it's not like something simple like, oh, there's a mirror you can shoot out. Their technology is in fact superior, and when they do finally defeat the Kelvins, it had nothing to do with their technology. It had to do with the fact that they took human form, and they were not used to that, and so Kirk exploited that, which I think is an original idea. And the fact that it wasn't so as simple as just shooting out a mirror did prove that that the Kelvins were superior, and that there was no tactical plan that was going to work. That the only way to defeat the Kelvins was to think outside the box and not try to overpower them. Any sort of tactical, any sort of fighting or sabotage or anything like that was doomed to failure. And I like that. It sets up an impossible situation, and I did find this episode quite intense and quite dire. Like, how is the crew going to get out of this? And I like the nonchalant way that the Kelvins reacted. They were just like, they had no animosity towards Kirk and crew, which is, different than how the Klingons or some of these other hostile aliens who are like, oh, I'm evil, I'm gonna twirl my mustache and I'm gonna where these guys are just like, look, we're conquering you, that's all there is to it, we're gonna take you, steal your ship, take it back to the galaxy, I admire you for fighting back, but I'm gonna punish you and I'm gonna stop you. And I will say, like, it is interesting how one of the things that stuck out to me in this episode is how they reduced everyone to those little cubes. I thought that was quite an original sci-fi idea concept that I haven't really, seen much. And the fact, and some people will point out, is that I believe this is the first and only example of a female red shirt who was killed off, which actually quite shocked me. I remember when they reduced the two ensigns. It was really a harrowing scene. Like, I really found the scene, and if anything, maybe it's a bit too disturbing for this episode. So if anything, it might bring it down a bit, where the aliens, the Kelvins, just like Kirk tries to escape and their escape plan failed miserably, he is like, well, look, I gotta punish you. Sorry, but I can't let this go unpunished. And all of you, senior officers are essential, but these two red shirt ensigns are not essential, so I'm going to kill one of you. And he even says, when Kirk's like, no, punish me, he's like, no, I know what it is to be a commander. It hurts you more to see that your actions have consequences on others than it does for yourself. And so he takes the two ensigns, reduces them to the cubes, and then crushes one so you don't even know which one it is, and then puts the other cube back, and it turns out to be the dude. And so it was the woman who got crushed. And I remember when I first saw that as a teenager, I was like, that really hit me. That's like almost find it really disturbing. And I do wonder if it was the dude that got crushed, maybe I wouldn't have found it as much disturbing. And because, especially watching the scene, seeing the look of horror on both of their faces when the Kelvin's like, I'm gonna kill them, and they're standing there like, Captain, and he can't really say or do anything to comfort them, and they're just looking at him for help, and he is like impotent to help them, and you see the effect that has on him, and how he, and he just watches helpless as they just literally crush one of his officers and toss it to him and be like, look, don't defy me or this is going to happen again, sort of laying out the stakes. And then Kirk, of course, being Kirk, comes up with another plan to defy them, but then that plan fails, and so they came up with the failsafe of Scotty giving him this plan to blow up the ship as soon as it enters the Great Barrier. And I do love Kirk's reaction. He was like, what are you, mad? And then they get to the turbolift and he has to be straight-faced. And Scotty, I thought it was a bit sort of maybe a bit silly how the whole time they were on the bridge and entering the Great Barrier, Scotty literally had his finger hovering over the button. I think that would have been a little suspicious to the Kelvins, personally. They were like, why does the engineer have his finger hovering over a button that's blinking? But we find out later the Kelvins did in fact know their plan and had already disabled it, so the plan wouldn't even work. But it was really high stakes, high tension. Like, Kirk, what's he gonna do? Like, this is a really good scene that I really liked. It was like, what is Kirk going to do? Is he going to well, obviously we know he's not, because the ship is still going to be around, but he can still try, because as we later learned, the Kelvins would disable it anyway, so his plan wouldn't work anyway. But it was a good character moment for Kirk. Like, what do you do? And he decides not to do it, and then later McCoy even chastises him for that. It's like, you had a chance to stop the Kelvins right there, why didn't you take it? That, I think that was extremely powerful. But then, of course, they realized that the better way to go about this is to exploit their newness, because this was because he tried, and this is what I said about why I liked this episode, because he always looked for a weakness. He's like, oh, let's use Vulcan telepathy to do that, but that didn't work. And it's like, oh, the power comes from their little devices that can instantly freeze us and turn us into the cube, so let's attack that. But then they found that power source for that was impossible to get to, because their technology was just so advanced. And so every time we tried to find cracks, a weakness in our army, you find that there is no weakness, they're just more advanced than you, and you're fucked. But when he looked at outside the box, stopped looking at it from a tactical perspective and looked at it from more of what is a weakness we can exploit, and Spock noticed that they were starting to behave like humans. They were starting to have emotional reactions and reactions to their physical bodies, which they were not used to. And Spock, from the use of his mind meld, was able to relay what they're actually like. Apparently they're these weird tentacle being thingies, which wouldn't be practical to be on the Enterprise, so they had to take human form. But with the human form becomes actually, all these things that come with it, with being like humans, so, and that they're not prepared for it, and so Kirk exploits that. Now, one of the ways Kirk exploits that is to hit on this hot chick, which, of course, because, fucking original series, every woman who appears, especially if they're hot, have to be totally enamored with Kirk, and Kirk is like the suave ladies. Man, I do get tired of that. But, the thing with the guy being jealous of Kirk and denying it because he doesn't really understand what jealousy is, I mean, that worked. Like, I think that really worked a lot. And I also, of course, loved the Scotty drinking that guy under the table scene. This is one of the highlights of the episode, of the whole show for me, actually. And this is actually referenced later in the Next Generation episode Relics, where Scotty appears. And I think I saw this episode before I saw Relics, but only once. So when I saw Relics, I didn't remember that scene when it was referenced. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, in this episode, they're drinking and Scotty's looking for something for them to drink, and he finds a bottle of liquor, and the guy asks, well, what is it? And Scotty is like, it's green, and just pours it because it's a green liquid. He doesn't know what it is. And they do the same thing in the episode Relics, when Data is at 1040 with Scotty, and Data is looking for something to drink, and he just finds this bottle of green liquid, and he's like, it is green, and it just pours it, and Scotty drinks it. So it's referencing this episode. So when I saw this episode again after I saw Relics, I was like, hey, that's where they got it from. Didn't even realize they were referencing this episode. But yeah, that was a great, I'm sorry, but that was, I talk about how I don't like the humor of the original series. This is one of the rare moments where the humor works for me. I mean, having Scotty drink this alien under the table in order to defeat them, like, how can you not love that? Like, that was just so good. Now, I will say that I think, although I do think it's very clever that this is how they defeat the aliens, because, you know, the using, as I said, normal tactics of trying to overpower them fail at every turn, that they have to resort to something a bit more clever like this. I do like that. It brings an interesting dynamic, but that being said, it did happen a little too easily. Like, Kirk is able to convince them kind of easily that, look, you're going to be human now. You just settle on their planet. You can be friends with the Federation. I won't, who cares that you just killed one of my ensigns in a brutal way? Whatever. We're friends now. We're just going to let you get away with that. But, Kirk's not really in a position to negotiate, so I kind of buy that. But still, it seemed to happen very, very easily. And it's because we need to get this episode over with. So I guess if I had a complaint about this episode, is that it should have been several episodes maybe, and it just kind of happened. It was resolved too, because it set up this impossible situation, possible for the majority of the episode. They were just fucked, and then at the end, all of a sudden, they're fine. Scotty will drink this guy under the table, and Kirk will hit it on this hot chick, and then that's gonna solve everything. So it did happen a bit too quickly, if anything. But I still like it. I still was very surprised that this episode isn't as light as I thought it would be. So many people tend to like other episodes of season 2, which I do not like, more than this one, where I think that's I think that was actually really well done. So there's one thing, though, about them, the Kelvins turning and the crew members into cubes. Like, when they turn everyone into cubes and Kirk is walking the corridors and he sees all these cubes lying around, like, shouldn't they, like, do something with these cubes? I feel like, and, like, they just leave the cubes of a horror, for example, just on the chair. Couldn't someone just step on them by accident and kill someone? I was just thinking about, like, Scotty and Tomar, like, if they wandered through the corridors drunk, and they could have, like, killed a couple people by stepping on these cubes and crushing them. Like, I just killed someone. Thankfully, the episode didn't go that dark. But I still, every time I see those cubes, I'm like, just get them out of the way. Don't just leave them in the middle of the floor where anyone can step on them. Just me. But speaking of dark, it's interesting because I just looked up that apparently the original script, the original idea for this episode was a lot more dark. That it had the Kelvins like torturing Kirk to the end of his life, and had them like killing, like blowing like a bunch of ensigns like out of an airlock, like just killing them randomly, and also had them like forcing, like pairing each like male and female and forcing them to mate so that they could breed livestock for them to, slaves for them to have in the future. Like, that is super dark. And obviously with that, they couldn't have the ending where they just make friends with the Kelvins, because that would be irredeemable. I actually agree with the studio on this one, that it was too dark. So they gave it to DC Fontana to rewrite, and she made it a bit more lighthearted and silly. And actually, I think that works better. As I said, I think the whole Scotty getting the dude drunk and Kirk, hitting on the chick, that is more, I think that's a better outcome than the super dark. If they made it super dark, then that would just, I don't know, it would be too disturbing and too like stereotypical, and it wouldn't really feel like the original series to me if they did that. It would just wouldn't work, in my opinion. So I agree with what they did by rewriting it. So I think that's pretty much all I gotta say about this episode. Now, before I move on, there is one more thing I have to say, because I mentioned this when I talked about when I did my revisited for A Taste of Armageddon, is that they actually directly reference A Taste of Armageddon in this episode when Kirk is like, Spock, do you remember when we are on in Minar 7 and you used your telepathy to disable the guard, which I thought was kind of dumb, but it was cool that they at least referenced it. Did have a direct reference to a previous episode, and they even called it out by name. Well, not the name of the episode, but the name of the world they were on, which I like that continuity. It's extremely rare in the original series to get that kind of continuity, so when I see it, I'm like, I appreciate it. But anywho, let's go ahead and thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. Of course, it does really help the channel continue, and I'm very much appreciated, in debt, one might even say, to these great people who have agreed to support me. So you have Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Valls, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Britton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Definitely very much appreciated. So we do have a few patron comments for this episode. First comment is from Ricky. To me, this is one of the underrated episodes of TOS, and frankly, I really like this one. The plot of the Enterprise crew being kidnapped and later on hijacked to a quadrant that would take years was actually an interesting premise. Also, the scenes in which each crew member, mainly the four, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Scotty, on how they subdued each other, each of the aliens, were quite entertaining, and the Scotty scenes in particular were pretty funny. I also have to bring out that this is the only episode of TOS where a woman or human dies. To me, when she turned into a powder stone and was crushed by the alien leader, I actually found that intense and very eerie. To see Kirk's reaction to it was really well pulled off. This episode does falter, in which Kirk has to woo a girl, and of course she falls for him. Every chick has to for him, and the jealousy that formed with the alien leader towards Kirk was a bit silly. So a strong episode, one of the better of season 2, so my rating is an 8 out of 10. Now, when I first read this comment, my first thought is, Ricky, get out of my head. Like almost every comment Ricky makes is like almost exactly what I think about the episode. It's just, we're just always like so in line with with each episode is almost a little bit eerie. But anywho, let me get to the next comment, which is from Brandon Neal Howells. By any other name, the only Kelvin episode you ever need. I'll amen to that. Anyway, this starts off strongly but loses its way as soon as the landing party gets back to the Enterprise, having a device which can freeze all motor and vocal functions and reduce people to cubes. So much for ugly bags of mostly water, which is cool. But why do the Andromedans have this convenient cave prison, and Yeoman Thompson is the only female redshirt ever? The actual form of the Andromedans is something akin to the true form of the Thymrians from Galaxy Quest. Okay, fine. Why does taking human form automatically bring on human emotions? We have dealt with this situation before in Cat's Paw. It seems that the main human emotions are getting drunk, wanting to make out, jealousy, gluttony, and getting hyper from whatever McCoy is pumping into Tomar. Kirk gets rapey towards Kalinda, and Rojan gets so jealous that he forgets to use his paralyzing device and finally realizes by the time they get back to Kelva, they will have evolved into humans. What? I don't get it. So Kirk offers them a planet he found them on without asking reparations for the death of the crewmen. Just watch the first half, the rest is too silly. 4 apologies out of 10. I would have given this a lower score if it weren't for references to Where No Man Has Gone Before and A Taste of Armageddon. So I mentioned how they reference the Taste of Armageddon. They also, of course, reference Where No Man Has Gone Before, but that reference is the barrier that holds the galaxy, which is something I actually don't like. And in this episode further establishes so much so that they actually mentioned it in Discovery, and I wish they would have just erased it from canon because I actually think it's dumb. But that's just my opinion. So Brandon definitely a lot lower on this episode than I am. I don't know. I did buy that. Them taking human forms would bring about these emotions and sensations that they're not used to. It is an interesting parallel you make, though, to the aliens from Galaxy Quest. And I was actually thinking the same thing. But I didn't think about Cat's Paw and how it was similar to that, because I don't make that connection, because Cat's Paw was such a bad episode and they did such a bad job at trying to convey what aliens being new to human sensations would be like. It was just, I want to feel sensations, which is just stupid. Well, this episode actually handles it better, so that would be my only thing. So anyway, my rating for By Any Other Name out of 10, I think, like Ricky, I'm also going to give this an 8. Extremely good. I think it's one of the better episodes of Season 2. I think it's definitely an underrated episode. Actually, I should have included this in my top 10 underrated episodes of Star Trek. I think my sister might have. Maybe she didn't, but I know she feels similarly to this episode that I do. I think it stands out as unique. Particularly in such a bland season like Season 2, where they just go to Earth like planets all the time, or just do stupid westerns. It's good to have something unique like this, which, calls back to other episodes and is called back into the future. So quite like this one. So anyway, that is it for my review of By Any Other Name. So coming up next on Enchantment of Eternity, next Monday I will be doing my review for Return to Tomorrow, and then Thursday I will be another Picard, the new episode of Picard, and then Saturday we'll be back with another TOS review with Patterns of Force, the Nazi episode. Jesus. Anyway, so be sure to check out my channel as I continue to cover the original series, as well as covering all sorts of other Star Trek videos and videos on many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.